Hi, welcome to Chapter 1, Developing Your Coaching Philosophy. The purpose of this chapter is to talk through what your philosophy of coaching is. I kind of asked you that in the first discussion, or what was the reason for you wanting to be a coach, and we're going to develop your philosophy along the way. Your philosophy is determined by the way you view people, the relationships you have with them, and the values that you hold. And due to the nature of being a coach or even a leader in general, uh, you have to be able to make those connections and form those relationships in order to be successful. And the key to developing your philosophy is essentially to get to know yourself. And that's what we'll be doing through this chapter. So, again, why philosophy? Philosophy is important because coaching comes with difficult decisions and ethical dilemmas. Your philosophy will sometimes take precedence over your knowledge of the sport. So, knowing yourself and having that well developed philosophy will give you the structure you need to establish clear and concise rules for your team, for your employees, if you have those as a leader. And again, determining and implementing discipline and other aspects of coaching are going to be clearly defined by that. That's why you need the tools to develop that philosophy so that you go in knowing yourself and knowing what your objectives are and what you want. The key to defining a clear path in your coaching career is also directly related to your philosophy. If you look in the textbook, there's the story of the old man, the boy, and the donkey. Take some time to read that story and really reflect on it. And I mean, the sum of it is that essentially everybody is not going to be happy with your decisions as a coach or leader all the time. And it's not your job to make everyone happy. It's your job to continue to build your athletes and to essentially help your team to reach success as a whole. So when you're doing that, it's important to have that clearly defined philosophy so you can drown out what everyone else wants you to do. When you don't know yourself, it's difficult to do that. And in the development of your philosophy, you'll be more effectively able to lead and manage your team because you know who you are and what your goals are. So let's talk about developing. It's very likely that you have the start of your coaching or your leadership philosophy, but it's essential that you turn that into a well-developed philosophy. Knock all the holes out. If you look on page 6 and 7, it gives the story of the math teacher who's also a football coach. And as a teacher, he practices the golden rule, do unto others as they will do unto you. He's very sensitive and perceptive to his students. But when he steps into his coaching role, he verbally abuses his athletes. He's yelling at them, he's berating them. And sometimes you will see that in someone who hasn't deeply defined their philosophy. You can't let your coaching philosophy drift off too far from your personal philosophy or your life philosophy because you'll find yourself being someone that you're not. And when you get into that situation, you'll find that you have trouble with leading your athletes or helping them to grow and develop. So your philosophy is going to be the things that you want to achieve or the things that you value. And your personal beliefs will help you to achieve your objectives. But it can also be influenced by your own experiences. If you look at the story of John Wooden, his philosophy on page 6 focuses on putting the team needs over personal needs. And one thing he says is that it may seem unfair at times. It may seem that he's showing favoritism, but he is not. One of the things as a coach and as a leader that you have to remember is that you treat everyone equally and with respect, meaning you don't disrespect or treat anyone as though they're less than, but it doesn't mean that you treat everyone the same. Everyone deserves respect, but different personalities can require a different approach. And as you approach each person that you're working with, you may have to adjust the way that you communicate with them or adjust the way that you handle a situation with them. And just make it clear and define it as, in this relationship, because of my philosophy on life, I will treat everyone equally and the same. But if it looks like I'm treating you differently, it's because I am. And again, treating everyone equally and treating them the same is not the same by definition. Equal means that you don't value anyone over the other, but the same means you would take the same approach every single time. And as a coach, that's not something you're going to be able to do because no two athletes are going to be the same. Your philosophy is not going to come to you overnight, and it will change with the experience you have and the things you learn over time as a coach. So don't think you have to fit into a certain mold or behave a certain way or adopt a certain philosophy or react to a situation in a set way. Your philosophy is going to be a direct representation of who you are in that moment in your life, but it's important to self-reflect and know yourself so that you don't slip into some sort of robotic role or slip into doing something just because everyone else wants you to do that. So, knowing yourself and self-awareness. You can't help anyone if you don't know yourself. Young athletes often seek out role models and they find them in coaches. Your philosophy, which directly influences your behavior, will leave a lasting impression. And for this reason, it is important that you know yourself. A lot of athletes in the professional realm will state that they didn't sign up to be a role model, but the fact that you're a coach influencing athletes automatically gives you that role model status, whether you want it or not. And a lot of times there can be self-doubt, thinking that you won't be able to lead a team because of the experiences you have or hadn't had. And that's not necessarily the case. It's important that if you have not done so already, that you take the time to get to know yourself. Decide, what mistakes you made to increase your self-awareness. And hopefully the athletes that you're working with or the people that you're leading won't fall into those same pitfalls or make those same mistakes. And you have to remember that everyone is human. So even though you tell them and you may even show them, sometimes they won't listen. But don't let that draw you away from your philosophy of growth and development. So self-reflection. Do you know who you are? Do you know what your goals are? Do you know what you want in life? Are you happy with what you have? And how are you working towards achieving those goals? Does your behavior reflect what you're trying to do in life? These are the things that you have to determine as you're beginning that leadership role as a coach. And once you know or feel like you can somewhat answer those questions, it's important to dive deeper, which leads me to the question, why do you want to coach? What is your purpose for being here? And what kind of leader do you want to be? I know some of you are enrolled in this course as an elective, and you may not even be remotely interested in coaching, but these principles can be directly linked to any leadership role you have in any company or organization. You have to know your why or your purpose for being there, what your internal motivators are, so that you can continue to grow and continue to be successful in that arena. That brings us to knowing your three selves. Keep in mind that when you're looking at these three concepts, these really do differ when you break it down and are honest with yourself. Your real self is how you really feel, what you really think. Your public self is how you want people to think of you, what you want them to think that you think. And your ideal self is who you want to be or how you would like to be. A lot of times we imagine ourselves in a totally different way than what we really are. We try to look at ourselves in the best light, and that's human nature. But a lot of times as you're starting to develop your coaching philosophy, it's important that you look deep within yourself. Look at the good and the bad. Look at the positives and the negative. But don't focus on what you feel may be a negative characteristic, but look at what's good about it, what you can learn from it, and how you can grow. Sometimes your three selves can be at odds. For example, there are coaches who really believe that in order to be successful, you've got to yell, you've got to curse, and your athletes have to be broken down so that they will listen and they will learn. But a lot of times in that breaking down process, you can also break relationships, you can break trust, and then that trust is never regained. And so it's important that you step back and look at your three selves and try to find a way to align the three, and then set goals for your shortcomings so that you can get to where you want to be. A lot of times you have to also recognize where your self-esteem is. Your self-esteem is influenced by your inner convictions about your competency and your worth. So how you feel about yourself, all three of yourselves, is going to be directly connected to your self-esteem. And it's important to remember that you cannot tie your self-esteem or your identity to just the wins and losses you have as a coach, the opinions of fans or other people in your life, but you have to tie your self-esteem to where your value is and identifying the parts of you and the things about you that are most important in your growth. When you start to do that, your self-esteem will start to rise because your perception is going to directly impact your success. And then the last thing you have to do is to just be real. I talked about that before. Another part of building a strong philosophy is deciding how much of yourself you're willing to share with your athletes. And it's important to find the right balance for you. Self-disclosure allows your athletes to see you as a human being, and that means not putting yourself on a pedestal and not pretending that you are better than they are, or that because you've had some life experiences that they haven't, that they are less than you. So a key example of that is a lot of times as a college student, you'll find that there are people who will tell you you don't know what you're doing, you haven't lived long enough, and that's not necessarily the case. Your life and your experiences can still help you to develop different philosophies, different ways of thinking, different ways to approach a situation. So you have to be comfortable with yourself as a student and then as a coach in order to develop a philosophy that will work best for you. Self-disclosure is essentially going to be determined by how open you are. Some coaches don't want their athletes to know them at all. Some coaches will fall into the category of wanting to be the friends of the athletes. And again, this doesn't just relate to coaching. It can relate to someone being in a position as a supervisor, as a leader. For example, if you interact with students on a day-to-day basis, getting to know them and allowing them to get to know you and be a human being will sometimes make them more comfortable with listening to you and taking any type of discipline or correction you have and running with it because they know that you actually have had the experience and you're not just telling them what to do. A lot of people don't like to be told what to do. In fact, most people don't like to be told what to do. We are free thinking people and we want to be able to grow on our own. And so what you expose to the world or how much you're willing to give of your real self to people will often determine how the strength of those relationships will progress. And when you're establishing the structure of your team, whether that's a sports team or a team within a business or organization, you can figure out how you want those healthy exchanges to happen and how much of yourself you're willing to give. So, final thoughts on this chapter. The most important thing to remember when you're developing your philosophy is that it must be yours and yours alone. You have to believe in it. Don't just say it because it sounds like the right thing to say. Don't just think things that you think other people think you should be saying. Just make your philosophy your own, connect it to your life experiences, and go with it from there. I know that you've already completed Coaching Form 1.1, so I want you to revisit that form, and on the section of your real self, ask yourself, did I answer honestly? Was it a deep answer or a surface answer? Like, is it still about how you want to be seen? Like, is it your real self? So, did you do your public self when in all honesty, you should have been doing your real self? How did you progress through the form? Because that's going to be key in developing your philosophy, which is an assignment you'll have to do later. I hope that this chapter was able to give you some insight on how to develop your life and your coaching philosophy. And I hope that it helps you to see how you can make those human and realistic connections as a leader or as a coach.